Today, Skip's 3 favorite things in life are Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, New York Rangers hockey, and his wife of 16 years, Anne. But definitely not in that order. Skip is here today to help us bring a culture of championship communication to our medical practices. Please join me in welcoming speaker, author, and aspiring rock and roll roadie, SkipWeisman.
If this New Jersey MGMA conference was a professional baseball game, we'd be heading into the top of the 9th inning. And if a baseball game ends at the end of the top of the 9th inning, what does that signify? It signifies the home team is the winning team, right? So would you agree that as we leave the bottom of the 8th inning, that the New Jersey MGMA and everybody who's put this event on is winning the game and has put on a winning event for you? Let's give him a hand. And so if a home team is winning after 8 innings, they bring in a special pitcher for the top of the 9th inning. It's called the closer. And that's a very big responsibility of that closer. My favorite team, the New York Mets, has not had a really good closer in a long time. I hate to admit that the New York Yankees had a pretty good closer for a long time. Mariano Rivera, some of you may remember that name. But it's a big responsibility to close out a ball game in the last innings when your team has a lead. And it's the same for the closing keynote speaker at a conference, especially when the conference has done such a great job and put on a winning event here. So I don't take that responsibility lightly, and I'm honored and humbled to be your closing keynote speaker. The one thing about the closer, though, even the great Mariano Rivera, he still had 8 players around him to help him close out that game, didn't he? And so I need a team around me to help me close out this event on a winning note. And my team is all of you. So I'm going to be asking you for some participation. Maybe if I ask you to raise your hand if something resonates with you, I'd like to see if you can provide me with that great support and teamwork. Or maybe I may ask you for more applause or something if something resonates with you. So can I expect you guys to be my teammates in closing out this on a winning note? Absolutely. Because you know the more engaged you are in the presentation, the better it's going to be for your learning. So let's dive in and see if we can close out this event on a winning note. A little while back, I found myself in the exam room of my orthopedic doctor. He had just left to go check on another patient, and before he left the room, he said, "Skip, I will see you next month on the 8th at the hospital, and we'll get this taken care of for you. And Katie will be in just a few minutes to go over your pre-surgery protocol." About 2-3 minutes later, a young lady walks into the exam room, introduces herself as Katie, and sits down at a little desk in the exam room, begins typing on a keypad, and looks up at the monitor and says, "Mr. Weisman, here's what we have to do the next few weeks to get you ready for your surgery. I need you to go to your primary care physician and have an exam and get a confirmation you're healthy enough for this procedure. We need to schedule you for some pre-op testing at the hospital about a week before the surgery. And I need you to review this document so you're prepared for your recovery and your rehab protocols." And she hands me a folder. Inside the folder is a document. On the cover, it reads, "Rehabbing your joint replacement." I said, "Excuse me, Katie, either you're in the wrong exam room or I am." She says, "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm not having a joint replacement." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Dr. Jones," not his real name, is doing a meniscus tear repair on my right knee." With that, her face turned flush red, and she got up to go out of the exam room. She said, "Excuse me, I'll be right back." She came back about 5 minutes later and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Weisman, we had a miscommunication. And we're good now. Meniscus tear repair, right knee, we're all good." I said, "Okay, thank you. Can you just help me understand what the miscommunication was?" And Katie says, "Certainly. When I was looking at your record, all I saw on your patient record was the details about the osteoarthritis in your knee, and that sort of triggered for me an assumption that it was a knee replacement There were no notes. Dr. Jones didn't put any notes in about your meniscus tear or the treatment plan for it. And as she's telling me this, I said, well, Katie, so you just threw the doctor under the bus and you gave me a great story for my next healthcare keynote. It all turned out fine. But I'm wondering, does that situation, that scenario sound familiar? Getting communication in your work environment is hard, isn't it? It's a challenge. You've got the doctors and the clinical staff and the admin team, and then you got those crazy patients, right? Getting it all right is really a challenge. Because you have to deal and manage with multiple personalities, don't you? Do you ever notice that often those multiple personalities show up in the same person? You're thinking of some people now, I think, right? Yeah, so it's challenging. Now, I wasn't always a great communicator. Back in my early days in baseball, you heard I took over my first CEO job at 26 years old. I was an immature leader. And I made a few communication mistakes that caused me some trouble. 3 stand out. The first was at the end of my second season as CEO of my first team in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I did something. I made a decision and communicated it in a way that caused our team to do something that, well, as far as I know, never happened before and hasn't happened since in all professional sports. And this one Monday morning in late August, I woke up to a headline in the Greensboro News and Record that announced this to the whole world. And I thought my boss was going to fire me. I was waiting for a phone call that morning after the newspaper came out. And at 8:32 a.m., my boss, George Dice, called our office. And in researching my book last year, I decided to go back into the archives of the Greensboro News and Record and see what that headline was, because it was 30 years ago. And I found it. I actually found it. And this is what the headline was. Hornets arrive too late. Gastonia does not wait. You got to love the creative headline writer with the rhyming thing going on, right? I wasn't quite as enamored with it back then. So my boss, George Dice, calls, and George was the executive vice president of an ownership group that owned 5 teams in the southeast United States back then. And George was a short, stout, southern gentleman based in Nashville, Tennessee. And he was an old-school numbers cruncher, financial guy. And you don't see this much anymore, but George always had a cigarette dangling from his lower lip. The first words out of George's mouth in that phone call were, "Skip, what the heck happened?" Except he used the word a little stronger than heck. I'll let you figure out what it was. I said, "George, every team in our league, after June 1st, moves their Sunday games tonight. We hadn't played in Gastonia since May. I assumed Gastonia did the same thing. I scheduled the bus to leave Greensboro at 3:15. Game time was 2:30. It's a 2-hour drive. We showed up 3 hours late." There was a long pause. Felt like an hour. It was probably 10 seconds. And I hear, "Okay, Skip, let's use this as a teachable moment. Never, ever, ever, ever again assume a game time." So I got a reprieve. I got a second chance. And I was really grateful for that, except maybe not grateful enough because, well, 3 months later, I made another decision, another communication mistake that tested George dearly. And I made a decision, and I announced it in a team meeting to start our next year, my 3rd year as CEO. And it actually impacted the personal and professional lives of our staff. And I didn't take their concerns into account, didn't even ask them about it. I just announced it, dictated it, because I was the boss. And I got some pushback. I got more than pushback. I got my number 2 guy, whose name was Kevin, to argue with me about it in the moment. And he took it into my office again, and I stood firm. And then the next morning, I got another call from my boss, George Dice. He said, "Skip, Kevin just called me. Just got off the phone with him. He wants me to overrule the decision you just made and announced yesterday." I said, "What did you tell him?" George said, I said, "Kevin, follow Skip's decision or find a new job." So I felt really vindicated. My boss backed me up again, which was a great leadership lesson that he taught me, with that when you delegate authority and responsibility to somebody, you back them up, and then you coach and mentor them to make it better next time. George was a great boss. He taught me everything I needed to run a financially successful baseball operation. And he also taught me about communication. Not in any framework or model that you're going to experience here in a few minutes, but just by the way he showed up, by the way he communicated with me, and the way I observed him communicate with other people. And so he was a great coach and mentor. And what he taught me, and what I've taken the second half of my baseball career, because I wasn't very good at this the first half of my leadership career, I've molded into this concept I call championship communication. And there's 3 components to it that you'll see in a moment. And you're going to learn that before the session is out. And it's absolutely something that you can, if you implement this and commit to it and set a standard. See, the subtitle of my book is called A New Standard for Workplace Communication. And if you take this and you set a standard for your work environment, it will absolutely create a more positive, productive, and more profitable medical practice for you. We're also going to talk about some of the deadliest communication sins I wrote about in my book, 3 or 4 of them, that are undermining your ability to implement championship communication today. And I also have a resource for you if you want to take your medical practice from where it is to this championship communication culture. There'll be a document that you can download and walk you through a 12-step process to do that. And you can facilitate those conversations on your own. And the reason why I do this, the reason why this is so important is because, well, getting communication right, as I said earlier, is not, the odds are not in your favor. Do you realize that there's only 3 possible outcomes from any communication interaction between human beings? Communication is either building the credibility, trust, and respect that you need, or communication is slowly eroding the credibility, trust, and respect that you need, or communication is instantly destroying the credibility, trust, and respect that you need. The odds are not in your favor. Do you notice that 2 of those 3 are not going in the direction that you need them to go in to get the right work environment? That means there's a 67% risk of damaging the relationship with the people in your work environment every time someone communicates. The odds are not in your favor. What we're going to talk about here over the next 45 minutes or so are going to put the odds back in your favor. If that's a worthwhile proposition to close out this conference on a winning note, let me know by a show of applause. Thank you. You had me worried there for a minute. So you heard about 2 of my communication challenges. We'll hear about a third in a moment, but I bet you have some communication frustrations and challenges. And what I'd like to do is just take a moment and hear what some of those are. And so you'll have about 1 minute. I'm going to ask you to turn to a neighbor at your table and just have a conversation. Think about what are the biggest communications interactions you have with people on your staff that drive you crazy, that you wish you could fix, that you wish you didn't have to deal with, that just make your life crazy in your work environment. And I'm sure there's a lot of common themes. So 1 minute, 30 seconds for each of you to share a communication challenge or frustration. Now, I know many of you come to these conferences maybe with friends, colleagues, and coworkers, and maybe even a boss or two. Is anybody here sitting next to somebody like that they know? When you turn to that person, here's a caveat, and you look them in the eye, and you're going to talk to them about a communication frustration or challenge, and you realize that they're the cause of it, find somebody else. We don't want any conflicts here. You have 1 minute. Go.
I'm sorry, I don't work for a practice.
You do.
I don't.
You do. I do. But do you have somebody working under you?
No. I'm in sales.
You're all by yourself.
I'm by myself.
Okay, let's wrap up your conversations. Okay, bring it back. It's now time to stop communicating. So I'd like to hear from a few of you, maybe 3 or 4 of you, what your biggest communication frustrations and challenges are. And here's what typically happens when I do this. Because there's only a handful of issues that we all face every day, right? It's all the same stuff, just regurgitated and articulated in different ways. So what's going to happen is you're going to hear somebody say something, and you're going to say, oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I wish I thought of that. This is going to turn into like the game show Family Feud. Right, when the family member gives out an answer and the whole family goes, yeah, good answer, good answer, good answer. So if that resonates with you, just give people the positive support that it was a good answer, and we'll get some energy going here. Who has one that they'd like to share with me, with us? Okay, we'll come down here into the, oh, geez, oh. This is, we've got to be in shape for this. Yes, your name?
Betty.
Betty. So what's your communication frustration challenge?
I think mostly we're not in the same office. We're scattered, and so we depend on texts and emails, and those are usually miscommunicated.
Yeah, a lot of hiding behind the text, and because as one of my other clients talks about, is lack of co-location is what they call it. You're multi-site places, and you don't get together a lot probably either to have those conversations. So you're doing it on the quick with text and email, and the messages just tend to get lost. All right, give her an answer. Yes, good answer. What else? Who else has one? Got to watch the pathway here. Yes, Charles.
I would say that the younger generation, I'm not here to pick up anybody, but we've been inundated with social media the last 15 years. We're an instantaneous society that people have a hard time concentrating.
Yes.
So everybody's trying to multitask.
Oh, that's a good one. Good one. Yeah. We're going to talk about that in about 20 minutes. We're going to get to there. Who else has one? This side of the room? Somebody's pointing at a friend, putting, come on. Okay, we'll stick on this side of the room. And your name?
Tarane.
Tarane.
Yes. I have a problem with one staff. She's a good worker, but I keep asking her to be polite with patients. But when she gets overwhelmed, she starts treating them bad. But she doesn't get it that whenever I ask.
Wow. So when she lets her emotions get the better of
Yes.
her, and that impacts everybody around in the environment too, right?
Impacts the patient and me as an office manager.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Anybody experience something like that? Good answer. Yes. Okay, back to my friends here in the room from earlier. Yes, and your name?
Oh, what we were discussing here is the fact that employees compare themselves to one another, that we're favoring or biased or
Oh, yeah.
comparing, and it's just hard to worry about other people's work, and it's just a little bit difficult to communicate to them because they have a wall, defense up.
Right, and they're
And
not.
I can't break that defensive wall. They're not
So-
listening.
So giving constructive feedback to people, and they don't want to hear it. They don't take it very well, right? And then they blame and they externalize. Anybody else have that issue? Yeah. All right. Anybody else? One more? Okay. Yes.
Patsy.
Yes, Patsy. I remember you from earlier.
Yes, lack of teamwork.
Okay. Can you elaborate what that means? How is that a communication frustration? Because teamwork is just a concept, but what causes it, do you think, from the communication?
I guess not communicating with each other in a team, within a team.
Right, and so just general lack of communication. Yeah, right? Good? Yes, absolutely. So in order to fix a lack of communication, the challenge is it's too broad and too general. We have to really get specific, which we're going to talk about in a second, which I think you'll recognize some things. So those are the challenges we're facing, and in my experience, we can solve all of these by really understanding the 7 deadliest communication sins, because all of them are related to everything you just said. And we're going to talk about 3 or 4 of them as we talk about the 3 traits of a championship communication work environment. And the first one was really shown to me to be really important with my 3rd big egregious communication mistake that I made back in my early days. One day I was sitting at my stadium office, minding my own business, doing my own work, mid-season, about mid-July, and suddenly from down the hallway I heard two loud voices. And I could tell these employees were beginning to have, well, let's call it a spirited discussion. It quickly escalated into a heated argument, and me being the person most responsible for the behavior and the performance of those employees and the person most responsible for the work environment, I did what many organizational leaders and maybe many medical practice managers would do. Nothing. I sat there wishing and hoping it would all just go away. Have you ever been there? So I sat there glued to my chair because I suffered from a certain medical condition back then that you may be familiar with. It's called CAPD. Have you heard of CAPD? No. What about COPD? Oh, yeah, of course you heard of COPD because there's a real diagnosed pharmaceutical that takes care of it. When you hear what CAPD is, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, and you may even know somebody that suffers from it. CAPD is confrontation avoidant personality disorder. If you know somebody with CAPD, raise your hand. If that person is you, keep your hand in the air. Thank you for admitting that in the room full of your peers. I suffer from it. I'm a recovering CAPDer. So imagine with CAPD, I'm sitting there and the voices get louder, and the voices get louder, and the voices get even, to the point where I know I have to do something. I push myself away from the desk. I hustle down the hallway, and I stand in between the two just in time before the first punch was thrown. It was that serious. Separate the two, and I was forced to finally deal with something I had been avoiding for months. 5 months. When it was all said and done, there was some good news, there was some bad news, and some really bad news. Good news, no one was physically hurt. Bad news, we lost 2 very good, dedicated employees. Really bad news? One of those 2 people involved was my wife. Yeah. 18 months later, we were divorced. Now, to her credit, she was trying to do the right thing. She was our director of business operations. We worked together. Another teachable moment. George Dice didn't tell me about that one. But she stepped up for me and stepped in for me for a confrontation I should have had. She thought I was being taken advantage of by this employee, and I wasn't dealing with it. And she did, and it didn't go well. Because would you agree that I probably should have dealt with this much more promptly than 5 months? See, the first communication trait of championship communication culture is prompt communication. And it's something that George Dice did on a regular basis. He called me at 8:32 a.m. when he heard about our team missing the game. He called me as soon as he got off the phone with Kevin about that decision I made. But I wasn't so good at prompt communication because I suffered, again, from another challenge with regard to communication. That's what I call communication procrastination. Anybody else have this challenge of communication procrastination or know people with it? The communication sin that aligns with this is what I call a lack of immediacy, urgency, and promptness. And it comes in many forms. And we could do a whole full-day session on this. But just suffice it to say, communication procrastination. What are the conversations that you need to have with folks or that people within your office separate from you need to have that are not taking place, that are being put off? And why do we put these things off? Because they're hard conversations. They're difficult conversations. We've tried them in the past that didn't go well, either with that person or somebody else, and we procrastinate on them, put them off. What's the cost of these conversations that are not taking place? And what are those conversations that need to start happening much more promptly than they are right now? Can you think of certain situations where this might be a problem for you in your medical practice? What do we do about this? Well, George Dice would tell you that we have to communicate at the first most appropriate time. Now, that's kind of a vague generalization, right? How do we know what that first most appropriate time is? I'm going to challenge you that you know when the first most appropriate time is. In the moment, immediately may not be it. Would you agree? Right? It's a public setting, public forum. It needs to be a private conversation, so we can't do it immediately in the moment. Or the emotions may be too high, and we need to let them dissipate for a while and come back the next day. What George would probably tell me is that we really need to be addressing these issues within 72 hours. No more than 48 to 72 hours. Because what happens if we let it go further than that? Not communicating promptly communicates it's not a priority. You may want to write that down. Not communicating promptly communicates it's not a priority. And is that something you can afford? If this is a challenge for somebody in your staff or yourself, I would challenge you to get some coaching on how to have difficult, challenging conversations, because there's real cost to this. Actually, in my book, there's a page where you can actually calculate the cost of conversations that are either not taking place or are just wasting time. And there's real dollars and cents cost to that. Wouldn't you agree? Yes? No? Great. There is. What are the salaries of people on your staff that are wasting time, having the same conversation over and over again, or not having the conversation at all, and they're trying to figure stuff out, or they're not doing things because they haven't been directed properly? So that's communication trait number one of championship communication cultures, is prompt. We have to set a standard for communicating at the first most appropriate time. Make sure issues are addressed within 48 to 72 hours. Now, sometimes we can't even do that because people are going on vacation, the doctors are in surgery all week, who knows? But we still have to apply a strategy that I call wait till your father gets home. Which means if we can't talk for a week because you're on vacation or that person's on vacation, before they leave, we're going to have a brief conversation that says, hey, this happened the other day. We don't have time to address it. I just want you to know when I get back or when you get back, we're going to talk about this. That way, you're at least setting the stage for it, and it's not going to be forgotten about. Think about if you don't do that and you come back that next Tuesday, a week or 10 days later, and now you want to address it, the person's going to feel like they just got blindsided. Not communicating promptly communicates it's not a priority. Does this make sense? Can we get better at this? Setting a new standard. That's communication trait number one. The second communication trait for George Dice, what he would tell us, is direct communication. And direct communication has a number of different components to it, but direct means direct to the source and about the topic that needs to be discussed. There's 3 communication sins that fall under this. And the one I want to focus on most is going to make the biggest difference in your medical practice, guaranteed. If you set a new standard for overcoming this communication sin, I believe it can increase your productivity and your staff's productivity by 50% virtually overnight. And it's a simple thing to do. I've learned this in an interesting way with one of my clients about 10 years ago, but then it was reinforced for me about 2 summers ago when a woman came up to me at a networking event for our Chamber of Commerce, and she said, we're having real problems in our work environment. Can I refer you to my boss, Joe? I said, certainly. I'd love to have a conversation. So on a Wednesday, she emails the two of us, a joint introductory email. And on a Thursday, he emails us back. His email said, I'd be happy to speak with Skip. Have him call me anytime. So I was pretty excited about the new business opportunity. About an hour later, I emailed Joe back. Joe, thank you for your interest in speaking with me. How is Friday at 10 a.m. or Monday at 2 p.m. for a conversation? A few minutes later, from his smartphone, I get an email back. He says, Skip, no, please call me late Tuesday afternoon. I'm taking Friday and Monday off. Now, are you thinking what I was thinking in that moment? I began to type an email. Joe, what happened to any time? He said anytime. So I emailed him back. I didn't say, have you ever gotten an email that got your emotions boiling and you wanted to fire off a snippy, snotty response? If you've ever done that, raise your hand. Wow. How'd that work out for you guys? Not good, huh? I don't recommend it. So I put that email away. I emailed back, Joe, enjoy your long weekend. I'll call you 4 o'clock Tuesday. Now, this is a Thursday. Thursday night, I'm sitting in my living room with my wife watching my favorite TV show, Big Bang Theory. And on a commercial break, I check my email. Joe sends me an email. Says, Skip, please call me shortly after 5 p.m. That's when I'll have time to speak with you on Tuesday. Joe, what happened to any time? I didn't send that either. Tuesday comes. I wait till about 5:06, 5:07, because who knows what any time and shortly after 5 means. Would you agree? 506, 507 I call. Guess what I get? Voicemail. How infuriating is that? Has something like that ever happened to you? Joe was committing a communication sin that I guarantee is happening virtually every day, every minute in your work environment, and it's called a lack of specificity. This is an epidemic in our world. Phrases like anytime are rather nonspecific. Agreed? What other nonspecific phrases do you hear throughout your day that cause you to have to be a mind reader, to guess, to wish, to wait, and hope? You've got one? As soon as possible. Yes, that's a good one. Anybody else have one? Later. Shortly. I'll get back to you. I'll start working on it. Yeah. These are the ones that you're hitting all the big ones. Right? It's almost done. I've got this. Yeah. I had a conversation about this a couple weeks ago with my wife. It was really funny. She said, do you know, I think, this is just me, she said, I think there's a real difference between as soon as possible and ASAP. I said, really? Tell me more. She said, well, as soon as possible to me, in my world, is when you can get to it. But she said, ASAP in my world, that's like immediate. That's when it's really serious. I said, okay, we have 150 people in the room here. We probably have 150 definitions for that, right? But I thought that was a funny conversation we had. This is killing your productivity. Lose this language. Stop this type of language. There's no reason to use it. As soon as possible means nothing. When I can get to it means nothing. Make a commitment. Set a new standard for communication. Now, there's two aspects of this. One is your communication using this type of language. Who's guilty of using this type of language? Anybody? Yeah. You're also guilty of accepting this from other people. And that's probably the bigger culprit. Would you agree that there's many times you hear these phrases and you just nod your head and say, okay. And then you what? You wish, wait, hope, chase. Stop it. Simple two-phrase solution. Stop it. Stop it. What should you do when you hear these nonspecific phrases? Ask for more information. And put it in their best interests. So that I can get you what you need and meet or exceed your expectations, I really need some more information. Can we talk about when you really need this? And if they really can't get it to you in that, or give you that specific time frame, at least it'll engage them in a conversation that you can get an understanding of where they're at and why. It'll open up the dialogue. Would you agree? We need to get a little more assertive and push back and ask for the information we need. Would you agree you can get better at this? Set a new standard, not just for yourself, but for your coworkers and your colleagues. Because this is really undermining your productivity. And you're chasing, and you're wishing, and you're waiting, you're hoping. You're walking away from conversations. God, they must think I'm a mind reader. Have you ever said that to yourself? Welcome to my world. Yes. So I'm going to challenge you to get better at this. Set a new standard and lose these nonspecific phrases. And definitely start pushing back and just asking respectfully for more information, more specificity, so that you can get people what they need when they need it. Is this helpful? Does this make sense? Is it easy? No. Right? It is easy. You just have to make a commitment to it. Because it's just a matter of realizing the situations. When you think you're being specific, many times we're not. Yes, Dawn. What do you think? If it's not a priority, then this is about the right conversation with the right person at the right time, right? We have to have a conversation around it. If it's not a priority, yes, they need to know. Otherwise, what type of relationship are you building? Because what you're probably doing is yesing them, and then we're going to talk about the next communication sin, which is a lack of directness and candor. So if it's not a priority, and we're trying to massage the conversation and we're going to be nonspecific, basically what we're doing is we're being passive-aggressive. Agreed? So how is a lack of directness and candor impacting your work environment? Here's some ways. Passive-aggressive. How many people deal with passive-aggressive folks in their work environment? Anybody? It's a biggie. Elephants in the room. What is the stuff we're not talking about, that we're not allowed to say, or people are afraid to bring up? General performance feedback without any specifics that somebody can use to do anything about it. That's why a lot of people don't listen, because it's just generic and there's no specifics to it. Have you ever been on a team where there's one person who is the problem child, and instead of dealing with it directly to the problem child, we just called a team meeting and talked about the issue, and then we wish and hope that the person who's the perpetrator gets it? Do they ever get it? No, it just goes over their head. What does that do to the credibility, the trust, and respect of that team? Kills it, right? It kills the team, and it also undermines the credibility, trust, and respect of the team leader. Would you agree? Because everybody knows they're not dealing with it. Nobody's hiding here. This is the stuff that really undermines teamwork and creating championship performance in the work environment. This doesn't happen in most championship athletic teams. We have to stop that. And then the last is sarcasm. Who are the sarcastic people in the room? Yes, you guys wear a badge of honor. You love that, don't you? How many people have ever been on the victim end of a hurtful, sarcastic comment? Anybody? Yeah. The reason why it's hurtful is sarcasm, the root of the word sarcasm is a Greek word called sarkazine. Sarkazine means to tear flesh. There's no surprise why sarcasm hurts sometimes. This is non-direct conversation. It's making a message, it's sending a message that has multiple meanings. It's non-specific, it's non-direct, and it's not helpful. So I encourage you to set a new standard for communication and lose the sarcasm when it's directed at one particular individual, because it's very hurtful. Does that make sense? We've all experienced that. So those are the first two communication traits of championship communication culture, and some of the sins that are getting in the way of them manifesting. And whenever I do these keynotes, I always have people come up to me after the talk, and they'll usually ask me one of two questions. The first question they'll ask me is, this is a really great presentation. I think we could use this type of presentation in our work environment, in our organization. Do you do these type of company programs? And I say, absolutely, I always do. If that's something you're interested in, let's talk when I get back next week. Give me your card, or you can fill out one of those postcards that you're taking notes on. The flip side is a contact form. If you want to talk about that, happy to do that. But the second question they always ask me is, they come and say, I have no problem with this. I have no problem being prompt and direct. People have told me I'm too prompt and direct. What do you think of that? And I say, well, I don't think you can be too prompt and direct. I think you're missing the third part of the diagram here. There's a trait that you're leaving out that causes people to think you're too prompt and direct. And the third one is the one that brings us all together, and it's really tough to bring all three of these together, and it's basically respectful communication. And the best coaches in the world, the Mike Krzyzewski's at Duke and the Bill Belichick's and the Patriots that bring on winning teams all the time, have a great communication style with the people on their teams. It's prompt, direct, and it's respectful. And you may hear from athletes saying, I didn't like what my coach told me, but at least I knew where I stood. Right? And he was saying those things in the best interest of the individual. And when we build that relationship with people, people will be able to hear the message in the right way when it's delivered with the right tone, body language, and from the right perspective, with the right intent. But there's three communication sins that get in the way of this. And the first one is also an epidemic, and Charles, you mentioned it earlier, I think, in your comments. And this actually is a funny situation that happened a couple of months ago, back in the dead of winter in Poughkeepsie, New York, where I live. My wife and I are sitting in our living room in the early evening. News is on the TV in the background. She's laying on the couch reading her iPad. I have no idea what she was reading, but she was pretty engrossed in the iPad. I was sitting on my chair typing an article for my website, and something in the news I heard triggered something for me, and I began to tell a story to my wife from that day. And she's still laying on the couch, reading her iPad, but she's giving me all the signals that she's paying attention. You know, those active listening signals, she's saying, uh-huh, yeah, okay, yeah, I got it, nodding her head, even though her head's still in the iPad. And then at the end, I ask a question. And then she says, Skip, can you just go back to the last thing you said before the question, because I checked out for a minute. I said, certainly, honey, can you tell me what the last thing was that you heard, because I don't want to repeat the whole thing if you've already heard it. With that, she sits up on the couch, throws her iPad into the cushion, and says, you caught me. I said, what do you mean I caught you? She said, I didn't hear any of that. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I thought if you just kind of give me the last little bit, I could piece that together with the question and give you an answer. Now, we had a good laugh about it because this is the work I do when she holds me accountable to my stuff as much as I do to her. So we had a good laugh about it. But can you imagine another couple in a different environment, that conversation going off the rails? Because, see, my wife was practicing something that's really hard for us in this century to do, and that's give people our focused attention. And one of the communication sins that get in our way is a lack of focused attention, right? We're always playing on our smartphones. We're trying to multitask when we have conversations. Have you ever done that? You ever been with somebody and they're saying, no, go ahead, I'm listening. I'm listening. Yeah. That makes you feel real important, doesn't it? Again, would you agree in a room full of your peers that you've also done this to other people? You're the victim and you're the perpetrator of all this stuff. Another two-word solution. Same word, two-word solution as the other one. Stop it. We can debate the merits of multitasking. There's research that shows it's not helpful and all that stuff. I'm not here to debate that. What I'm here to ask you to do, though, is set a new standard for human interaction. Because would you agree that if it's a conversation between two human beings, you can't multitask? Something is going to give, and it's typically the other person in the conversation. We have to stop this. Now, if we can't give the person their focused attention, what we need to do is deflect it and say, listen, now's not a good time. Can I come down to your office in 30 minutes when I'm finished with something? We have to redirect these conversations. But we can't multitask when we're talking to somebody, and we have to really, really set a standard for ourselves to stop it. I was doing this program for a large nonprofit in our area, full training. We did 6 sessions over 3 months. Every 2 weeks we'd come back and do another session. And I was amazed after we spent basically a half day talking about lack of focused attention. I was working with the CEO, the C-level folks, their vice presidents, and their director levels, 25 people in the program. And they set a new standard. In that work environment, all 25 people agreed that they were going to work on this. This was going to be their thing, and they were going to set a new standard for. And we came back 2 weeks later, and they said, it's made a huge difference. What I'm doing now is every time somebody comes to my office, if I can, I will close my laptop computer down. I will face the person and have a conversation with them. Before, what I was doing is I was always doing this. And said they're actually getting feedback from their team members that's been very helpful. And if they forget, they're giving their people permission to call them out on it. And they're making adjustments. Another woman in another large training I did for a large New York State employer up in Buffalo, New York, I was working with the vice presidents of the company. We went through this. And the VP of marketing says, just last week, 3 of my direct reports confronted me about this and asked me to change my behavior with this. And she was open to it because we had this session. So think about what difference it would make if you set a new standard for giving people the focused attention that they deserve and asking for it from other people. Again, we always seem to be not assertive enough in asking for what we need from other people, and we just accept it. And I think we need to use respectful body language, tone, and approach, putting things in the other person's best interest so that we know it's coming from the right intent and asking for what we need and asking people to shut down their technology when we're communicating, especially in meetings. Right? Wouldn't you love people to just shut down the technology in meetings, but they're always on their tablets and their smartphones? So I'm taking notes is the excuse, right? Are they really? So lack of focused attention is really an epidemic in our world, and we need to stop it. Now, what I'd also say is we're as responsible for the other person's focused attention as they are. Would you agree? As a communicator, we need to be communicating in a way that allows them or wants them or engages them in being focused on what we're saying, right? We have to take responsibility for that just as much as they need to, which means we have to talk about things from their perspective, why it's important for them to listen, what's in it for them to listen from their perspective. We also need to be talking succinctly, right? Instead of going around and around and around with some story that makes no sense, and then people get lost. All of us have very short attention spans. That's okay. We have to adapt. We need to be succinct in our communication. Talk in sound bites, talk in bullet points, and from the perspective of that individual and what's most important to them. And there's a whole nuance around how we can communicate this way, to communicate to influence, and we have to focus in that area. People will give us focused attention. Now, you have a lot of stuff going on in your world, in your life right now. It's the end of the conference. It's been a long conference. You're probably waiting to get home. The weekend is a few hours away. We haven't had lunch yet, so lunch is 10 minutes from now. Have I been able to command your attention thus far? You can do this too. It's my responsibility to command your attention because you got other stuff going on. My responsibility up here, it's not your responsibility to pay attention to me. You're presenting, even if it's a one-on-one conversation with somebody, you're presenting. Command their attention. Would you agree you can get better at this? Overcome the communication sin of a lack of focused attention. So those are the 3 communication traits of a championship communication culture. It's a small sweet spot. You see the little red dot there? Bringing it all together? That's where it is. And it's that small because that's how hard it is to build a habit. Most of us, mere mortals in communicating, and you've probably noticed this as you look at this diagram, we default to 2 of these 3. We're more comfortable with 2 of these 3. And the third one we're not so comfortable with, and we shy away from it. It also may be impacted by who we're talking with. Right? So we may be prompt and direct with certain people, and we forget the respectful. We may be direct and respectful with some people, but we leave out the prompt. Right? We may be respectful and prompt, but we leave out the directness. Can you see how situations and different communication styles might impact what we bring to the conversation? So begin thinking about this and building this habit and be a much more conscious communicator when you're interacting with other people. And stay in the moment and remind yourself to bring these 3 together, because this is what creates championship cultures. When the leaders are communicating promptly, directly, and respectfully, and everybody knows where they stand and why, and then you can work on moving them where you need them to be. Does this make sense? Is this helpful? Cool. So I told you about this little coaching conversation sequence where you can move your organization from where it is today from a conversation and communication standpoint to a championship culture. It's a 12-step program. It just kind of worked out that way. But it's a document. It's about 10 or 12 pages, and it will walk you through 12 different meetings you can facilitate the conversation for. It's got some language, scripting, questions to ask your people on improving communication in your work environment. If you'd like that, this is now an opportunity for you to bring out your smartphone. Text the word CHAMP to 66866. And what will happen is you'll get an email, text back that will ask you for your email address. Put your email address in. It will send you a text back with the link to download this document on your phone, and you'll get an email in about 24 hours that will back it up so you'll have it in 2 places. So if you'd like that, just text CHAMP to 66866, and you can do this yourself and have conversations. You know, if you can put 15 or 20 minutes towards each of your meetings and just have a conversation about how we can improve communication, and you do it on a systematic basis, you know you're having that as part of your meeting every week or every month, whatever your sequence is, it's not going to go away, and you can build on each meeting and give people some homework or something to focus on in between. There's all sorts of exercises that will walk you through from one sequence to the next. So that's my gift for you for allowing me to share my strategies here with you. And I'm really passionate about creating championship work environments. Is that worthwhile? You guys going to do that? Cool. So, a couple final thoughts here. Wrap this up. There's only one thing between you and lunch, is me. But I have some other gifts for you. New Jersey MGMA has some other gifts for some folks. This is going to get a little crazy. We have, under some chairs here, my business card is taped. For anybody that has my business card on a chair that they're sitting on or nearby that has my business card, you're going to get to take one of my books home. So check under your chairs and don't go too crazy. Hold on to that. Hold on to the cards if you got one. And on your way out, there's a stack of books on the back table that you can exchange for the book. Now, before you leave, we're not done yet. I've got one other point for everybody. Okay. We'll get the books on the way out. Hold on, I'm not done yet. If you have a card, hold on to it. We'll get the books on the way out. One final point for everybody. It's going to bring this all together. We're going to wrap this up in just a few moments. Again, if you would like to stay in touch with me, I'm launching a new website in 2 weeks. It's going to have all sorts of resources and videos on leadership and communication training and everything. If you'd like to stay in touch, please fill out the contact card on the postcard. You can rip it in half. It's perforated. Turn that into me, and we'll get you on my list, and we'll get you all the resources that I put out on a regular basis. You heard that I was CEO for 5 different baseball teams over my 16-year career. And you heard that I wasn't a very good communicator in those early years. And there was one specific incident that really brought this home to me about how we have to communicate to really make a connection with people. And it's actually the only baseball story I tell. Actually, it has any relationship to baseball or the game. One afternoon, my field manager, Butch, on game day, was trying to get in touch with me because he had an injury on his coaching staff, and he comes up to my office in full uniform, and managers rarely, unless it was really necessary, would come up in full uniform to the front office. So he shows up in my office one day. He says, "I've been trying to call you. You've been on the phone all day. I had to come up here because time is running short." He says, "Bobby, our pitching coach, hurt his arm the other day, and I need another arm to throw batting practice." I said, "Well, Butch, it's 3 o'clock. Batting practice starts at 4 o'clock. I don't think I can get anybody here in time." He says, "No, I realize that. I was thinking about you." I said, "Butch, I was a high school baseball dropout. I can't throw batting practice to your guys." He says, "No, you're athletic. You play softball. You play tennis. You can do this. Come down to the clubhouse in 30 minutes. We'll get you hooked up." So 30 minutes later, I'm down in the locker room, and I'm dressed in a full uniform. 4 o'clock comes. I'm out on the field, standing on the pitcher's mound, 55 feet from home plate, standing behind this L protective screen, and there's a bucket of baseballs at my feet. Have you ever said yes to something and then thought, "Oh my, what did I just get myself into?" I'm staring down in the batter's box with a professional ball player there, very intimidated. Have you ever been in an environment with other people that made you feel somewhat intimidated? So I overcompensate. I wind up like it's the bottom of the ninth inning, Game 7 of the World Series, to throw as fast as I can. And to my surprise, the batter swings and misses. Must be beginner's luck. So again, I wind up like it's Game 7, bottom of the ninth of the World Series. Throw as hard as I can. Swing and a miss, strike 2. I'm building a little confidence. I wind up again, throw as fast as I can. Swing and a miss, strike 3. If this had been a ball game, I'd have my first strikeout. Have you ever heard of Nolan Ryan? Nolan Ryan is the greatest strikeout pitcher of all time in Major League Baseball history. Hardest thrower of his era or maybe any other era. You know what I'm thinking in this moment? I must be the Nolan Ryan of batting practice pitchers. I'm throwing the ball too fast. They can't hit me. As soon as that thought passes, I hear a voice from over my right shoulder. It's the guy who was in the batting cage before. He's now practicing his base running. They practice running the bases after they hit. He yells into his teammate, "Steve, you have to wait on it. It's coming in slow." It's coming in slow. It's coming in slow. So I think to myself, I'll show you coming in slow. I, again, begin to wind up. And I hear a voice from the side. It's Butch, our manager. He says, "Hold on, Skip. Kevin's right. You're trying to throw the ball too hard. Your arm speed's coming around fast, but the ball's coming out slow. It's messing up the batter's timing." He said, "Just throw the ball normal and naturally. Stop trying to be Nolan Ryan." How'd he know? I must have been giving up some type of vibe, right? So have you ever thought you were doing something right and you got some feedback? You had to make an adjustment in the way you're dealing with stuff? So after that, I just throw the ball naturally. No big wind-up or anything. The next pitch may have gone in slow, but it went out fast, 350 feet over the fence. After that, every pitch, they're spraying the ball, hitting the ball all over the field. And I realized something in that moment. The job of a batting practice pitcher is not to strike out the batters. The job of a batting practice pitcher is to pitch the ball so that it connects. The job of a batting practice pitcher is to get the players warmed up for the game, get their timing down for the game, so they build confidence for the game. And for this, I realize your job as a medical practice manager is to pitch your communication so that it connects with your people, so that your people can build confidence in themselves, in the environment, the workplace. See, pitching batting practice is just like communicating. How you pitch it determines how you connect. I trust that this session has helped you learn a few tips that will help you pitch your communication next time so you connect better than ever. It's been my honor to serve you this afternoon. Thank you so much for being a great audience and participating. Thank you. Pick up your books on your way out. If you want me to sign them, I will be signing them at the information booth in about 5 minutes.